Good evening. I'm Mike Perry. I'm the president of the Army Heritage Center Foundation. The foundation is the Friends Group for the U.S. Army Heritage Education Center, located in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. A component of the Army War College, the center is dedicated to preserving the memory of our Army and its soldiers. Tonight, we're here to talk to two young soldiers. Compared to me, they're young, who participated in our operations in Iraq. So I'd like to turn the floor over to them. It's a little bit different. Normally, the book has been published. Their book will not be coming out, look like, until January of 2023. So we're, in a sense, getting a preview of what they're going to describe in their book. So at this time, Kelly, I'll let you introduce yourself if you're ready.
Okay. Kelly Eads. I born and raised in Northwest Missouri. Graduated in 2003. I joined the Army right after graduation. Really, the biggest thing with that and why I did that was I grew up in a military family. My many uncles, cousins, all a bunch of Marines. They always make fun of me for being the Army guy, all the way back to World War II. So after 9/11, I mean, the passion was there, but after 9/11, it was burning brighter than ever. So as soon as I could sign up, I did. And spent 6 years in the military, 6.5. Ended up getting out after 2 deployments, serving with the 101st Airborne, and law enforcement now, still kind of serving and taking care of family.
Okay. Dan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. And thanks for everybody for joining. I served with Kelly for a couple of years, which was really the genesis of our relationship in this book. I've been in the Army my whole life, but I was born into it. My dad is a Vietnam vet. His father was a World War II vet, and we continue to go farther and farther and back in that tradition as well, as like Kelly mentioned. My uncle was in World War II, got blown up after Operation Breakout, or during Operation Breakout in the hedgerows. And then was one of the first people recruited by Billy Donovan into the CIA in the 50s, where he spent 3 decades, there. So, from a military family. I graduated high school 1985, and suffice it to say, I did not have a very strong GPA, or not really sure where I wanted to go. So I enlisted, finished up my enlistment, came back, went to a community college and transferred immediately into Georgetown University, where I attended ROTC, and then earned my commission as a second lieutenant in the infantry and did all that stuff, Ranger School, Jump Master, etc. And then found myself in Vicenza, Italy, as an airborne rifle platoon leader. Then I had a break in service, actually, because of an opportunity, and I spent a lot of time doing counter-narcotics, and then came back on board on active duty as a captain, and 2000, right at the beginning of 2001, actually. And then from then on, 9/11 happened, and I've been back and forth between Iraq and Afghanistan and a couple other places for over 2 decades, where I eventually retired as a colonel out of the United States Army. And now I work inside of the defense industry, where I provide sensor technology solutions to law enforcement and our military today, which gives me a lot of satisfaction because I get to stay involved. So that's, a general summary of where I've been and where I'm at today. So thank you.
Okay. Well, pull up the slide deck that you provided here in a moment, as soon as I can get the technology done. Okay, this is a cover from your book that'll be coming out here in January. Could you tell me what's that picture from? Do you remember?
Operation Glory Light. That was
Okay.
a huge operation that we kind of, Dan, you can explain it more. You had a lot more insight on it, but there were hundreds and hundreds of soldiers, kind of our final push to the Euphrates River.
Okay. Is this early in the war?
I would say around month 4 or 5, Dan?
Yeah, for our deployment, it was halfway through our deployment. It was technically the third OIF rotation into Iraq. However, it was the second back-to-back one for the 101st Airborne Division. And our brigade, though, in particular, was attached to 4th ID. A little bit earlier was 3rd Infantry Division, then 4th Infantry Division. And Glory Light was exactly what Kelly put out. We were pushing into the Southwest Baghdad region of the Triangle of Death that we can talk about in more detail. And the overall intent was to really get after Zarqāwī and Al-Qaeda's logistics and finance and ability to run car bombs and VBIDs, as they call them, vehicle-borne IEDs, into the city of Baghdad because they had to come through our area. And Glory Light was a little bit opposite of what was happening in the city of Baghdad, where people were kind of moving back into their FOBs. We were pushing out into the countryside to cut off the supply lines and movement of Al-Qaeda at the time. So it was very different and unique and required a lot of understanding from a lot of different leaders at all sorts of levels.
What's the significance of the title of the book?
So Black Hearts is the insignia that was on the side of our helmet. It goes all the way back to World War II, where the 101st and other units had like a deck of cards. You know, they had different spades or diamonds, and we had the 502nd Strike Force was given the Black Heart. So it's one of those things where in both deployments, when I went in 2005 and 6, and then back again in 07 and 08, that the interception, the communication interception of the enemy on the battlefield, Al-Qaeda and Jaish al-Mahdi, they would call us the Black Hearts. They were, you know, they would say this unit is different. I mean, they're more fierce, they fight harder, faster, they're more passionate. So that's just kind of where that part came from in regards to that's what we wore, and that's what the enemy identified us as.
Okay. And the painted guns?
Painted guns is in my second deployment. I was in a scout reconnaissance platoon, also scout snipers, and we were tasked with time-sensitive targeting during that time, where we went after the high-value targets in our region, south of Baghdad. Really the same group of guys that we were chasing. My first deployment in 0506 had pushed even further south. You know, they kind of been pushed out of that area, and they knew who we were. We knew who they were. And as we were targeting them, it was only a single platoon that had painted guns out of the probably hundreds and thousands of soldiers in that area. And they knew that we were the platoon that was coming after them.
Okay. So it was a bonding experience for that particular platoon?
I'm sorry?
A way you differentiated yourselves from others?
Well, yeah, that and the fact that, you know, we did a lot of reconnaissance and surveillance. We spent a lot of time in the reed lines, sometimes days on end. Watching the enemy's activity, giving situation reports back to our command. We'd go out and work for the company commanders. They would specifically request us. So we had to be able to blend in the environment. So it just depended on what location we were at, would be the color or the way that we would camouflage ourselves and our weapons.
Okay. Why did you write this book? Why was it important to you?
Many reasons. The first, it started out as a family heirloom to a certain extent, where my dad and my parents really asked me to take notes and journal everything, which was super, super difficult, I had found to do when I was over there because we were so busy. But he did it. He did it as a state trooper. He kind of wrote his own little book for the family, just for the family to pass down through generations. And it was really neat reading those things that if he hadn't written that book, would have had no idea the things that he had experienced. And so we really appreciated that. And then he did the same thing in 0506. He deployed Iraq as well as a contractor for Iraqi police, and he was up in Mosul. So he would train them and take them out in operations, and that was where basically all that came from was my family really asked me to write something. So it's where it started. That's where it started snowballing from that. I never thought it would become a book, but the second reason is really to tell our battalion story. It started off as a family heirloom. I thought, man, there's a lot going on here. And I think this could be a lot more important than just my family knowing what we did and what the battalion did. But I would like to motivate, hopefully, the battalion and the young kids that are there now that, you know, we looked back when we were in the battalion and we always lived for those guys before us, the guys who served in the 101st and Desert Storm, Vietnam, World War II, and the other operations they were on. That's what we look back for. That's who we wanted to really represent. And I was hoping that maybe just a little bit of this. I'm not read very many on the 101st Airborne books. There are some out there that really explain what we did as a battalion, as a brigade, as the division itself during the global war on terrorism. And I really felt that was something that needed to be written. So that kind of took shape there, and the snowball got bigger. Then, you know, obviously, and in my opinion, most importantly, is to recognize our fallen, the guys who didn't get to come back home with us. And I wanted the families, you know, if they want to read about it, that's why I have this book. If they don't, you know, they don't have to, but maybe their grandkids do, or their great grandkids do, or maybe their sons and daughters. So I wanted to provide something that they could have in their hands and see how heroic, how brave, how motivating, how loved their loved ones were serving with myself and Dan and others. Ultimately, that's what this book is for. It's to go back to those courageous souls and give back to them, because if it wasn't for them, a lot of us still wouldn't be here, and you know, we wouldn't have the country that we have today.
Dan, why did you get involved?
Why did I get involved?
I was asking Dan. Why did Dan get involved?
Yeah, so I had actually I had already deployed a couple times prior, you know, and as a commander, and in my career, I was always, fortunately or unfortunately, you know, that, you know, once an eagle type stuff, I was always a commander, platoon leader, or the operations officer at various levels. So I never really kind of held a 12-hour staff job. And the whole war from 9/11 onward, for the most part, really became my personality, and it was a challenge in that aspect to kind of keep that separate a little bit, you know, because that's not actually how life is normally lived. But this was a long war, and we were constantly going back and forth. Some more than others. Doesn't mean anyone's better than the other. But I had a tremendous amount of experiences, you know, from levels of violence to despair, the whole 9 yards, amongst soldiers, myself, combat, firefights, etc. And I had taken notes and kept those in my green books and so forth. And then Kelly and I connected, you know, later on, and you know, he asked me to take a look at it, and I did, and it was very similar to what I had, you know, always reminisced about, thought about, and had written down. And some of the context that was a little bit missing on that aspect was, you know, Kelly was out there as a soldier, you know, a specialist out there during this deployment, you know, as he was moving up in the ranks of staff sergeant eventually, but he was fighting the fight on the front lines, you know, and I was at that point the operations officer that was, you know, moving with the battalion, you know, TAC along with the battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Rob Haycock as well. And so it kind of gave that full, you know, comprehensive picture about how a battalion can fight in combat under extremely austere conditions, even in the mid-2000s, with all the amenities that are normally provided in a quote-unquote forward operating base today. And so it just kind of came together for both of us. And I think it did a lot of, it helped us. It made me remember a lot of things that I probably didn't want to remember. But it brought it out, so it was really good, and it helped us both. And I think Kelly was very, very eloquent of what he said with regards to the families and you know, the descendants and the legacies and so forth. The 101st.
Kelly, you said this was done in part to honor those who you served with and those that didn't come home. Who were some of the important people in your life in the unit, and who influenced you some of the most?
I would say the first person, hands down, that comes to my mind is First Sergeant Tesser. He came to our company in probably early 2005. And he was the soldier. He was the leader that you wanted, that you felt most comfortable with. I've never met anyone like that before in regards to a non-commissioned officer being able to tactically lead his soldiers and make them feel super confident in what we were doing and know exactly what the mission was. First Sergeant Tesser he had previously been a Green Beret for, I would say, I don't know, probably 17, 18 years, somewhere along those lines. And he had kind of moved around within the Special Forces community, and he had his last 3 or 4 years left, and he was done with his last duty there, and he was going to, wherever that was at, he had the option to come back home, or to move somewhere else within the groups or that community. And he chose to go back where he started, and that was with the 502nd, which is really neat. And he, he could have done anything in the world that he wanted to, especially with the organization that he was with. But he ultimately told his wife and us, which, I didn't have that many conversations with him because he was my first sergeant, but we did have a good relationship. But that, he came back because he wanted to give back to the soldiers. He wanted to give back and spread the knowledge that he had been blessed to obtain while he was in the Special Forces. So his ability to teach, because he was a Green Beret, that's what they do for a living, was phenomenal. I mean, it was amazing. He prepared us to go into combat like no other I'd ever seen or heard of. From everything generally the regular Army does just regular Army stuff, and he started teaching us more unconventional stuff. He pushed, and the battalion leadership, but I think spearheaded by him, pushed like our squad leaders down to Nashville to ride with police officers to learn what a suspect or what someone who's up to no good, a criminal, would do when they're under pressure, when there's that stress inoculation, when they're close to something they don't want to be close to, how they give off that body behavior, those indicators. That's not what the Army does, but he did it for us, and our battalion command supported that.
So they brought a unique perspective to your unit.
Oh, it was amazing. Yeah, it was amazing. If you had a good idea, he listened, and he pushed battalion and brigade to go for it, and it was pretty cool. It was pretty neat.
Now, did he just stay with you during the entire deployment, or did he move on?
Well, unfortunately, we got to Iraq. We did what's called left seat, right seat rides, where you go out with the unit that's there already, and they start showing you all the important areas in your battle space, who to talk to, who you can or can't talk to, danger areas, all those things. And then they ride with you for like 2 weeks. It's like a 2 week with them. And then they ride 2 weeks with us, like a month-long thing. And then it's your first day out in your battle space. And him and some good friends of mine were killed on that first day.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, Mike, let me give a little clarity to that, because
Okay.
what Kelly's telling you is true, is actually true. But let me just kind of explain the impact it had on the battalion. So the battalion there were some vets from previous deployments there, not many. A lot had rotated out, and we had taken over the battle space on that day, like Kelly said. We were 2 hours into full ownership of the battle space, and we had a catastrophic IED that killed First Sergeant Tesser and everybody else that was in the truck with him. I'm 6 feet. If I stood in the blast, it took up the entire road and you couldn't even see my head. But when that happened, it was devastating because of the personality and who John Tesser was, no question about it. On the other hand, you want to talk about combat and violence and war, there was not much experience on how to handle a combat engagement, because there was eventually soon thereafter, there was mortars, there was small arms fire, and there was some NCOs that were in that patrol that had combat experience. But when you go all the way back up through to the battalion operations center and so forth, there was not. And it was a handful of us that kind of picked up and took it. And, you know, and I'll be honest, from my perspective, I had 9 months in between the two deployments that I was on. And when that happened, I don't know what happened to the 9 months back at Fort Campbell. They were gone. It's like I never left. But it was a devastating experience at 2 months. But I mean, 2 hours into the deployment, because guess what happened within 48 hours? Family notifications. Nobody expected this to happen.
No, let me slide over to your. Well, here's Kelly during his deployments, and here's Dan during his deployments. Here's your battle space. You want to talk a little bit about it?
Dan, I'll let you break that down.
Yeah. So, so if you can, as you can kind of see, you know, Baghdad, you know, was one of the, the critical centers of gravity, you know, because that's where the level of national governance, you know, was. All the way up north, you see Mosul, and then down, you know, in the far, you know, southeast Basra. And then when you look there, just northwest of Basra, you see Nasiriyah, and you're kind of getting into that whole area of a large Shia population and so forth. But southwest of Baghdad, you know, at the southwest corner of that star that you see there is where the Baghdad International Airport was. And that triangle that highlights there is the triangle of death that really connects, you know, Fallujah all the way down into those three, Yusufia, Mahmudiyya, and Iskandariya, which is a nexus of road transportation, water, the whole 9 yards connects right there. And the famous Route Jackson, which ran everything from Kuwait and Tampa and everything ran right up through that area and into Baghdad International Airport. Southwest of that was all crops and farmland that you see in the darker inset there of the yellow. In there was canals that were running, you know, intersecting all over the place. It was farmland, and that's where local farmers lived. There was a couple paved roads that ran that way. The rest were hard-packed dirt roads. Generally speaking, just one Humvee could fit on the road. If one wanted to pass in the opposite direction, the other truck had to pull off to the side. The canals weren't that deep, but in some areas, they were deep enough that if you walked in there, you were going to sink. And if you were in a flak vest and all that combat equipment, you're going to drown unless you knew how to be calm and get out of it. But the canals were infested with tall reeds. And if anybody's read history books and looked at the hedgerows in World War II that I mentioned with regards to my own uncle, you could be walking alongside of an Al-Qaeda patrol. And if you weren't listening, you wouldn't even hear each other. You wouldn't even see each other because the reeds were so thick. So the moment you had enemy contact, you had to get out of your truck. You couldn't be, you had to dismount and maneuver. It just wasn't going to generally work in that particular area. But more importantly, after describing the terrain there for you, what that area was a safe haven. We got, our brigade was supposed to be with the 101st Airborne Division up north. And 2nd Brigade, the Blackhearts, got pulled out and was sent down to this area because the unit that was there previously never went past a certain grid line because it was infested with IEDs. And what turned out to be the case is that was the safe haven that Al-Qaeda had as a command center for logistics and everything, where everything would flow from the northwest by Fallujah down into that triangle of death, and then it would turn north through that area to go into Baghdad as Zarqāwī was trying to use sectarian violence to split Shia and Sunni, and also to kill, obviously, American soldiers and eventually Iraqi security forces as well. And so nobody had been in there since the invasion. When we went there in the invasion, and I passed through there in the invasion, and I remember having to go back down into that area as a company commander, and I thought I would never get out of there. It was seething with hatred. And we took 17 casualties that particular day in the previous deployment I had, along with one of my fellow company commanders at the time. And so here we are, we're back in that area again, not just up in built up areas, but in farmland that had not been patrolled. Nobody had seen a US soldier at all since the invasion, if they were in, even if they did see one during the invasion, because we went through there so fast. And so now we were back in there, and it turns out that we quickly, as evidenced by First Sergeant John Tesser's IED blast, that was the beginning of us realizing that there was a protective belt around that particular area. And then we started learning about how significant it was. And then, honestly, chaos and violence just erupted from that point on because nobody had been there.
Okay. Sort of like Cambodia was during the Vietnam War.
Yeah, yes, very similar. A lot. That's a good point.
Sort of logistical base. This was a small unit war. So your junior enlisted soldiers were quite often played a much more significant role because if they did something positive, no one cared. But if they did something negative, it would make the press. So you use the term strategic corporal. Kelly, would you talk about how that affected you as you were out and what type of instructions you received when you went out on patrol?
So, the biggest thing that you had to do as a corporal, a first line team leader, sergeant, young specialist, was, it was really hammered in our heads. We've got to win back this community. If we don't win this community over, we're not going to be able to take care of Al Qaeda. And, you can fight the enemy, but if you can't win the hearts and minds of the community itself, then it's not going to go anywhere. So that was really our biggest goal, was to really win them over first, and then we'll take care of the bad guys later, because they'll start flipping on them. Doing that, we're the corporals and those first line supervisors were placed in a lot of tight, tough situations. You had men, when you get into a gunfight or a large explosion, or you made contact of some sort, whether near or far, they wanted to flip that light switch on. They wanted to go take care and handle business. And unfortunately, there was times when good people were also on the battlefield, and you had to really restrain your guys, which is good in a way, to not try to wrap everybody up, but they wanted to go out and take care of business. And it was very difficult as a corporal, as a young sergeant, to teach your men, help guide your men on how to win those hearts and minds. I say one very a good example was, I remember being it was actually my second deployment, but it applies to all of this. We were attached to an Iraqi ERT team, which is like your American SWAT team, for the entire nation of Iraq. And we had been pushed out into these patrol bases with these guys, these really tiny Iraqi police compounds that kept getting ran over. And it was one of those things where they put us in place to help take care of and help defend those compounds. Well, one of those Iraqi patrols went out on patrol without Americans with them, got hit by an IED, and we showed up. We immediately vested up and ran out there, drove a mile or two, and got there as quick as we could. And as soon as we pulled up, the firefight ended. We didn't see the bad guys, but we know we go to support our Iraqi counterparts, and they're pointing at these three houses. And as a young, really, then I was a sergeant, but it was the same thing across the board for any unit. We eventually took those three houses over. We slowly, methodically cleared one, building 2, and building 3. And as soon as we get to the rooftop, we can see 3 or 4 middle-aged males running through this large crop field. Like, obviously, that's probably the bad guys, right? But it wasn't 100% the bad guys. It wasn't the first time, or it wasn't uncommon for your local citizens to run or to get the hell out of the area when an IED went off, because they knew that, especially if the Iraqi army was in the area, because the Iraqi army would go in and wrap everybody up. So it was one of those things where I'll never forget my guys and I arguing over why are we not engaging them. And it was one of the hardest, especially when it comes to counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, really you have to be careful, because if you shoot the wrong person, you kill the wrong person, you can turn an entire village against all of your success. So it's one of those things where, internally I knew these were the bad guys, but again, I didn't want my guys to go to prison if it wasn't, and I didn't want to kill someone who wasn't involved. So, if they had a gun in their hand, it'd have been a different story. If they'd have been wounded, probably because of the Iraqi police, it'd have been a different story. But it took that small team leadership that, was handed down to us from our battalion command, all the way down to our squad leaders, our platoon sergeants, our company commanders, who really ingrained that to us during stressful environments and training. And they taught us, right from wrong, and how to really learn how to flip that switch on and turn it back off. So there was a lot of power in just a young man's hands, and it had to be handled very carefully.
Was this something you learned over time, or was this contained in your rules of engagement?
Well, of course, both,
Okay.
It's something you learn over time, but when you're, like for me, it was my first deployment, and my first deployment was my most difficult deployment. And I'm sure Dan can rate that one somewhere in the top 3. But of all of his deployments, from what I've read and heard from other materials and everything, but you learn through training, of course, how to handle stressful scenarios, and they really prepare the first line leadership. That's where it all starts. And a lot of other units aren't that way. They don't get that proper training. They get the training, they don't get the actual passion of command to make sure that first line leadership, all the way up to squad leaders, platoon sergeants, and everything else, really know how to handle those scenarios. And I think that's what was super special about 2nd Battalion, because there's others that weren't that way. But then through experience too. So, my first deployment, especially your first couple months, and in country, you're pinching cotton and your adrenaline shooting through the roof, and you're doing everything you can to control your men, the scenario, the situation, and yourself and your mind. But the more you go through it, the more you're able to relax, think. I don't want to say you get numb to things, but it, in a sense, it becomes normal, which isn't normal, but it's normal to us when you see it day in and day out, and you can really start guiding your men and your troops in the way that is expected, and the way that a professional army should do.
Okay. Dan, you're up at the headquarters. You admitted by your nature that you are fairly aggressive. How did you, at the same time, push the units to engage, but with restraint?
The battalion commander, Rob Haycock, he told me, when I came on, I was asked to, right when I came out of company command and redeployed, I was asked to stay on and go back again as a battalion operations officer for Rob Haycock. And Rob told me, he goes, look, I command the battalion, you run it. And I have to tell you that the amount of confidence he had in me and his NCOs and his company commanders was phenomenal. So it allowed myself to push the battalion, where we thought we needed to go. And he generally went out and made a physical presence, in one area, and I would be in another area, and vice versa. And I would tell you that, from the way, and Kelly and I have it in the book, and, I don't think a combat infantryman or, combat intelligence officer, combat logistics, transportation, doesn't matter. You need to know to do one thing, and that is to win on the battlefield by breaking the enemy's will to fight, which means killing them, period. You need to kill the enemy. And you could drive home all you want from doing a playground by some mosque or by some school or some whatever, and then you're 500 yards from that, what you were just doing for the community, and an IED goes off. And if you can't get out of your Humvee and calmly place the red dot reticle on center of mass at the target of the enemy and shoot and kill him or her, then you probably shouldn't be in combat and shouldn't be in war, period. It's just that simple. If you want to go into discipline and target discrimination and so forth, then you can build off of that. You try to build a soldier up from target discrimination in a coin environment without having the foundations of what I think is the best FM field manual we've done, which is 7-8 in battle drills, in getting behind cover and laying down massive amounts of firepower. If you can't do that initially as your foundation of who you are, you're not going to have the skill, the expertise to be able to actually walk into a coin environment and then start having positive identification and target discipline and fire control measures. It can happen. And so I think what we did as a battalion is we enabled, our company commanders and our platoon leaders and sergeants to do that back at home station. And then when they got there, and this particular deployment in 2005 and 6, the whole world of hell broke out. I mean, it was crazy. And because we were able to fight traditionally and violently, despite the restrictions that we kind of had on us, the better. Eventually, we communicated up to the higher levels that we needed at a minimum, because we weren't really shooting any artillery, that company commanders could actually end up going into handheld mode and shooting their mortars. And we never questioned them in that. Just shoot. And if you're under threat, you feel you need to defend your unit, shoot. We'll talk about all that stuff later on. Doesn't matter. So I think that's how we kind of really, as a battalion, did really, really, really well in that aspect.
Okay. Kelly, your dad deployed.
Yes.
Teaching to help reconstitute the Iraqi police force. Other folks deployed and helped train the Iraqi army, or try to reconstitute the Iraqi army. How often did you work with them, and did you feel confident in their capabilities?
My first, it's kind of funny, my first deployment, it was so chaotic and violent that they would not even come to where we were fighting. Hands down, would not come. The Iraqi police would not come. The Iraqi army refused to come there in the beginning. They had been there before, and they had gotten rolled up numerous times. They knew where we were going. They knew what was there, probably well before we did. And I don't even know if they passed the information on, but they didn't want to go there. So that at that time, I wasn't very impressed with the Iraqi army or the Iraqi police. My second deployment in 07 and 08, it was not much. I was probably 20 miles away from where I was the first time, just southeast of there. And things had changed. And I think your regular police officer and army guys, they weren't that special. There was nothing to them. They probably dropped their gun and run in most scenarios. But I was attached to the Iraqi SWAT guys. I mean, they had a different mindset. So, and we do operations with Iraqi special forces, so who had been trained by our special forces. So they were a lot more confident. I think things were getting better. I definitely, first deployment, I wouldn't want to probably go on an operation with those guys. We did off and on. Second deployment, it was hands down. They were ready to rock and roll. And especially after, once we got plugged in with them, we called it March Madness in 2008. That's when Muqtada al-Sadr kind of released his Jaysh al-Mahdi. It was like 50,000 fighters. He told him to go ahead and start fighting the Americans again because he wasn't getting his way into politics. So in March of 2008, all hell broke loose. It was like overnight, like at midnight. You heard the order, and it was immediate explosions of gunfire all night long. And it was like, okay, here we go. And they were doing pretty well. I mean, there were some units that broke contact and never came back as far as the Army guys go, the Iraqi guys. But once when I was working with the ERT guys, those SWAT guys, once they really had their first mass casualty, which I can recall, there were 6 dead guys in the truck. There were like 11 of them. There were 7 or 8 of them that were, however many there was, spread throughout the road, and the rest of their team saw that. It was like their light switch kind of kicked on. And it was like, okay, we can't just be going through the daily operations anymore. We got to be serious about this. And it wasn't too much longer after that we were no longer leading. They were taking the lead. And that's what we wanted anyways. We wanted them. That was our ultimate goal, was to get them up front, advise and assist, and then eventually pull out. And the area that we were in was the first battalion AO to hand over completely that AO to the Iraqi government. And they did well. They did great. So, you know, two different deployments, two different experiences, but the second one was a lot better than the first. So I think they did well.
Dan, you were up at the battalion level. Kelly talks about what the soldiers were doing on the ground. At the battalion level and interfacing with the Iraqi army or the Iraqi police, how confident were you in their capabilities during your deployments?
My first deployment, you didn't really have any Iraqi security forces. We were one of the first ones at the time up in Mosul in 2003 with the same brigade,
right?
Under Joe Anderson at the time, who was a brigade commander, and Dave Petraeus was up there as well. We started establishing the foundation of them, and then when I came back less than a year later, all of the ones that I had trained were killed. They were basically assassinated walking home from having chai in the evening or whatnot. But there was a huge amount of effort that was done with Sticky, the Security National Transitions Command, in between, you know, the first deployment and the second deployment that I came back on with Kelly. But Kelly's right. Nobody would come to our area. The Iraqi senior leadership would not send anybody down, and nobody would come. Eventually, an armor unit came, and it was handpicked. And it did fairly well, but it was not going to stay there with us. And it was an armor unit. Nobody else would come down unless it was an armor unit because of the IEDs. But there was momentum, and you started seeing the structure kind of start taking place. The wrong leadership, you know, was kind of in place. You know, there was, you know, all that, you know, type of relationship that kind of exists in that culture. Then it started to take a little bit more shape and form. Like Kelly mentioned, particularly within the special operations community, both on the police and the Army side. But if you kind of fast forward over time to today, it's worked fairly well, you know, for the Iraqi, you know, Ministry of Defense. On the flip side, where I have multiple deployments in Afghanistan, that's a completely different story. Yeah, I think that's fairly evident what happened there. But yeah, we were one of the units during that time period that were left to our own devices without Iraqi security forces because they did not want to come down in that area. It was Zarqāwī's backyard. He owned it.
Yeah, I'd ask Kelly this in a sense. Did you see improvements in their NCO corps? Because you know, the NCO, you're talking about getting it done on the ground, so it's your sergeants. Did you see them getting better as we train them?
Are you talking about the Iraqi Army NCO Corps?
Yeah. Yep.
No.
No. Okay.
You know, I didn't experience working with. Well, yes. Okay, I'll take that back. I worked with a couple operations with large elements, as that would be like a scout team leading large elements into combat. And we had watch for days, and we take them in. I didn't really train with them like the company line did. So we just be out there and waiting. We link up, and then we kind of take them in and show them where to go. But I worked with the Iraqi police, Iraqi SWAT guys, the second deployment.
Okay.
That was who I worked with, and they did really well. Yeah, I mean they were passionate, and I would say this probably is the same way with the Iraqi Army. They were passionate. If they found out somebody was on the inside, we found this was happened over and over again, was kind of mole. You know, they were playing both sides. I don't know what happened to those dudes, but they wouldn't show up again once they found out. And then, I mean, they took care of business. They wanted Iraq to be stable. They were tired of all the chaos, so they took it up. I mean, it was up to them to make that happen. And you know, not necessarily an NCO Corps with the police, but I could tell within their commanders and their team leaders that they were learning for sure.
Okay. One of the concluding chapters in your book is called The Kitchen Table Battlefield. Would you want to discuss that? I think, Dan, you wanted to take the lead on that.
Yeah, Dan.
Yeah, you know, the kitchen table battlefield was something that I kind of started picking up on, I don't know, probably the third, fourth deployment out of the 7, 8 years I've been over there. You know, and you had so many casualties, whether it was, you know, a fallen hero or wounded in action severely or whatnot. And I mean, you know, but then you would have your memorial ceremony and you would do your honors overseas in combat. And you'd look at, and, you know, I'll never forget looking down at Kelly's unit, you know, and, you know, I'm like, okay, we're 48 hours, they got to get back after it. So how do you actually make sure they get back after it? And the only way you do as a leader to do that is you physically, you know, you go out there and you sit with them in their remote, you know, outposts and spend time with them, go on patrols with them, and you know, and make sure they understand, or that you as a senior leader, as a field grade, understand what you're putting them through and asking them to do. But you get through that, and then you pick up with the love and the camaraderie and so forth of your fellow, you know, warrior combat screaming eagle guy, strike force soldier next to you. But meanwhile, you have, you know, your wife, your spouse back there with the kids, and they're trying to go to soccer games, they're trying to maintain a rhythm. They're all, you know, coming together and doing things, and we don't talk about that. We talk about, you know, this book talks about the, you know, quote unquote glory of combat and you know, all the selfless service and valor that took place in the battlefield, but our society still doesn't really talk about that kitchen table battlefield. And like my wife, for example, has always been an FRG leader or advisor at every level of command. And I was involved all the way up to the division level. And so she was advising division commander spouses. She was a brigade FRG advisor, our battalion FRG advisor for this. And I can't imagine what it's like to be there within minutes of the notification that their husband was killed in combat, and then have to be with them with the kids screaming and crying, and the wife crying, and, you know, the widow crying, and the Gold Star wife crying, all that rolled up into one. And then that's a day, you see them day to day. You see them in the commissary, you see them in the PX, you see them, it just continues on and on and on. Meanwhile, the soldier that's gone forward is moved on to the next mission and so forth. And it starts to just really take a toll. And, you know, using my wife and I as example, I mean, we're very close, you know, we're very tight like this. Went on deployment one, tried to get back together, but mindset was sending us back, got like this. And then eventually it just kept getting wider and wider and next thing you know, she was married to the families, the Gold Star wives, and I was married to combat. And we were not the same anymore. And that it was the kitchen table battlefield where we sit here and continue to talk about the combat exploits and everything that's happening over there. And it's exciting. People make movies, write books about it, but nobody talks about the boring, so to speak, less than exciting kitchen table battlefield that has tremendous amount of mental scars and challenges for them and the kids, as well as the soldier, you know, that, you know, has to come home and integrate back into a new family, a new kitchen table routine, a new everything. And we wanted to make sure in this book, because this was a strategic fight that was won through tactical violence on this deployment, because it led to killing Zarqāwī. But this strategic fight that was won through tactical violence was felt by our families, and they deserved to be understood by those who read this book, period. And that's what I really mean by the kitchen table battlefield.
Okay. Kelly, anything to add?
No, I don't. You know, I went there single, and I didn't, you know, I was right out of high school. I wasn't living the life that Dan and a lot of those guys were. I remember being, you know, at that final formation and seeing the families behind us. You know, there's like barriers. They're back behind the barriers, and you're getting your last speech from your commander and your last speech from your first sergeant. And then the guys who had been in combat, their faces were ready. They were stern, ready. You know, they were laser focused. And then here I am, new guy. Like, I had nothing really other than my family at home. You know, I want to come back to them, but I was ready to rock and roll. And those guys in the back of their mind was like, how am I going to probably survive this next one and then keep things going again when I get back home? You know, I look back now and I can see that. And, you know, my second deployment, still, I was a single guy, but then I paid a lot more attention out on that second deployment to the guys who were married, and I was watching them. You know, we actually had, you know, like not Zoom, but video stuff. And I'd sit in these trailers when I got a chance to come back to the main base, which wasn't very often. And I would see them talk to their families. I'm like, man, I couldn't imagine. I couldn't imagine, what the soldier and the families faced. But Dan nails it. I mean, he kills it in that chapter. It's an eye opener, and it doesn't matter if you're a single guy. Doesn't matter if you're in the Army now or if you're previously were in the Army. He really, really speaks the truth, and it's very eye opening about what both sides are challenged with and how much the families here at home balanced or had to balance with, their loved ones gone to war.
Yeah, in many ways, the families during your deployments were much more significantly affected because of the news. One, your ability to talk back to your families. I mean, I went on a deployment, and if I couldn't find a Mars radio station to talk to, I didn't talk to my wife while I was deployed, and letters might be on a month behind. But as you're saying, people could go back if they did get back to the rear, sit there and Zoom with their family, which was I think a challenge then of then turning back both for the spouse and for the soldier to go back into the field.
Right.
I want to go here. This is the picture of your unit in 2005, 2006. Anybody there that you want to point out?
Oh man, all of them. I'm looking at my screen right now, and I can see First Sergeant right there in the middle. It's hard to see, and I don't have my computer. It's on
That right here.
Yeah, right in the middle. It's hard to tell. But then there's, the far back, I'm standing beside Justin Byler. He's one of my best buddies, and to my left, he's to my right, and to my left was Brandon Hurst, another one of my best friends, both of them. And Byler to my right was killed with Tesser. That picture right there was taken right when we got to Baghdad International Airport. I think probably right before we took over the AO, not too long before, we had our first KIA. So yeah, there's a lot of good dudes in there. I love that picture. It makes you smile.
Okay. It's good that you can smile still. You wrote the book in part to make sure your fellow soldiers were not forgotten. You want to talk briefly? You already talked about First Sergeant.
Yeah. Talked about First Sergeant. And then, if you look at him, the next to the right would be Justin Byler. He was from Texas. Great family. He came to my house multiple times for holidays when he could Texas. Phenomenal dude. Texas was better than everybody else in his mentality. If you weren't doing it right, everything in Texas is bigger, man. But awesome dude. Just one of the best guys I've ever known. And then Johnson, I didn't know him very well. I didn't know him very well. They were in the truck with those two. But Martin, I know I've heard a lot of good things, but don't get me wrong about Johnson. Of course, he was a phenomenal guy, phenomenal soldier, and in one of the best platoons that there was. And then going to Martin, crazy thing about Martin is I bumped into him once or twice. Both those guys, really young soldiers. So was I, of course. I was a baby. We were all kids when we were over there. But he was one of the most level-headed, easygoing guys I've ever known. He's just super, super good dude. And I bumped into his brother, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago in law enforcement. Don't even know him. I went to Oklahoma for a training event, and we went out to get a drink after it was like a 3 or 4 day training event. And his brother, I saw at this bar, I saw this band on his brother's wrist. And I just like to tell a story because it's crazy how things happen. It was actually a counter ambush class, and we're all there trying to learn these things and new tactics and things like that. And I see Martin on there. I see October 31st, 2005. I'm like, man, no way. And I asked him, I said, there's no way that's the Martin was the 101st Airborne, is it? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, he was killed on basically Halloween. He's like, yeah. And man, we all sat back, rubbed the back of our heads. Just how do we come together like that? I think this is a good way to, kind of end this video, but whatever here in a moment is how things come full circle, how he didn't know what was going on. And that he had no clue. The Army didn't really disclose things to him, and that's okay. That's what the big Army does. But he wanted to know the truth, like what really happened and how was he killed and what was he like over there. And man, we sat back and we were supposed to be at work the next morning at like 6. I don't think we left that bar until like 3 in the morning. We went on forever. We talked and talked and talked, and nobody wanted to get up. And it was really just crazy how God makes things work. And it brought peace to him. It brought peace and comfort. And it's just the craziest thing that, you know, the world's small. I've learned that. But
well, thank you for giving them some closure, because that is important for a family member.
Look, so that gave me even more passion. I think that was probably like back in 2015 or 16 when it happened, and that really reignited the passion to get this book done. You know,
Okay.
like man, reason this happened, and then that's right after that it bumped into Dan, and here we are.
Okay, let me go ahead and.
You know, Mike, while you're flipping through, and Chad, I just want to, you know, those were the 4 that we lost within 2 hours of taking over. I'm not going to get into numbers because there's so many battalions in the U.S. Army that did phenomenal stuff during that and other deployments, but the amount of casualties that we had from KIAs was 5 times or so, a little less than that. And then I can't, it's in the 3 digits with regards to wounded and particularly severely. It was a very violent deployment.
Okay. Kelly, what would you like to say in closing?
Well, I want to thank you for inviting us on, first of all, and the organization. It's an honor to be on here and to talk about the book. You know, I'll be completely honest with you. I don't like being on TV or stream like that. I'm like, this is the last thing I want to do. Dan, you're the man. Why don't you get on and do all this stuff? But I felt like I owed it, you know. I just want to say thank you to my friends and family and to all the soldiers. You know, the biggest thing about this book is that it's not me or Dan's book. It's taken numerous dozens of people to help us bring these stories back together again, because I couldn't remember it all. You know, Dan remembers his parts. I remember my part. There was operations that I was on with guys, and they were to my left, and they don't remember what I remember, and I don't remember what they remember. So it took a lot of reconnecting and tying the dots and everything like that to really bring us together. And I just want to thank them. You know, they'll see this eventually, but they know who they are. It doesn't matter. So biggest thing is just, I just want to give thanks and to all those guys, and a big thanks to the guys who are still serving. You know, go get them, keep it up, don't stop.
I see that they now have a Facebook page, so I can let them know that you gave this talk on Facebook if it doesn't bother you.
Man, they make me proud.
Dan, you have any closing comments?
Yeah, it was good for me to reconnect, not just with Kelly, but with my past on this particular deployment. A lot of decisions that were made led to a lot of catastrophic incidents, and that gets hard to deal with, not just for me, but for anybody that was in the chain and anybody that deployed before or after me. And I'm just, honored to have had the opportunity to put these words to paper, so people can be able to look at it and share it as the years go by, even when Kelly and I and everybody that's on here are gone. So again, it's just thanks to the families for putting up with almost 2 decades of rotating deployments. And thanks for the Army leadership and the Joint Force, as well, to do their best to try to just figure this out over time, because it wasn't easy. But I'm just glad to have been part of it.
I want to see if there's any questions in the field. If you would, folks, if you want to ask a question, use the question icon. We're not going to talk too much longer because it's a long time sitting there for an hour while you're on the TV screen.
I'm all right.
Okay, you're all right. Once you start talking, it's fine, right?
Yeah.
But what I want to tell you, partly what you're doing is important, critically important. And I would ask that you take your notes and sometime find an appropriate place to have them stored. Your conflict will be one of the most well documented with classified materials that public will never see. But what we're missing is those letters and diaries that soldiers kept that wind up in places like the U.S. Army Heritage Education Center that allows generations past, in the future, to come and find out what you experienced. So, Dan, you said you kept your green notebooks. Eventually, look at finding a place for them. The same thing. It's important when your book gets published that we'll get it here in the collection so that your grandkids can figure out what you did. Because that's sometimes what we do here is not only help the Army figure out what it did, but also help families figure out what their now grandfathers and grandmothers have wound up doing. Right now, we got no questions, so I want to, I'll let you close. Thank you again for doing this. For those who want to get a copy of the book, it's going to be published theoretically in January 2023. I think Casement is your primary publisher. It's also already available for pre-order on Amazon. I went to check the sites this afternoon. So please do pick it up. For those who listen, please let your friends know. We'll be posting this conversation up on YouTube here in the next day or so. So let your friends know. We'll let everybody know who signed up and who didn't sign up on an email blast about this talk. So again, thank you. I would invite everybody back on the December 14th. We moved back about 10, 15 years. We're going to talk about Green Berets, Klan militias and blue helmets, U.S. Special Forces in Somalia, 1992 to 1995. So in a sense, a prequel of what you two experienced in Iraq and Afghanistan, with clans and tribes. So again, thank you very much and look forward to talking to you in the future.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, good evening. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.